Chapter 1. The Silenced Daughter. The great halls of Marlow Manor had always been filled with the echo of footsteps and the clatter of cutlery, but rarely with laughter. The estate, built of grey stone and cold pride, loomed atop a hill like a fortress overlooking the valley. Its towers pierced the clouds, its gardens trimmed to perfection, yet there was no warmth in its beauty, only the severe dignity of a family that valued legacy above life itself. Inside, Lady Alara Marlow sat at the long dining table, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The meal stretched before her was fit for royalty: pheasant glazed with honey, roasted root vegetables, fine wine imported from across the sea. Yet she tasted none of it. Her father's voice, deep and commanding, filled the silence. "Lord Blackthorn has written again," Lord Cedric Marlow announced, his heavy hand tightening around his goblet. "He requests further discussions about a union, a favorable match for you, Alara." Her stomach twisted. She did not raise her eyes. She knew her father despised hesitation. "Blackthorn?" Her elder brother Roland smirked from across the table. "That old wolf? Twice your age, sister. You'll be more nurse than wife." The other brother, Gareth, chuckled cruelly. Their mother, Lady Beatrice, shushed them sharply, though she did not defend Alara. "Lord Blackthorn commands 3 fortresses along the northern border," Lord Cedric went on, ignoring his son's mockery. "A man of influence. Such an alliance will strengthen this house." Alara's heart thudded. She wanted to speak. She wanted to cry out that she was not a pawn to be traded, that her life was not her father's bargain to strike. But when she parted her lips, her father's cold eyes snapped toward her. "Alara," he said warningly, "do not speak unless spoken to." The words, familiar as a chain, closed around her throat. She lowered her gaze once more. Her mother's voice, smooth and detached, broke the silence. "She will do her duty, Cedric. Our daughter understands her place." The conversation shifted, her brothers laughing over hunting stories, their father boasting of lands and titles. Alara sat motionless, her voice buried beneath obedience. That night, when the manor fell silent, Alara escaped to her chamber. She lit a single candle and drew out her most precious secret, a stack of parchment bound with ribbon, hidden beneath her mattress. Here, in the pages of ink and longing, her voice lived. She dipped her quill and began to write. "To whomever may read these words, if ever they should escape the prison of my chamber walls, know that there is a heart within this house that beats not for alliances or duty, but for freedom. Know that there is a voice, silenced each day, that yet yearns to sing." The scratching of her quill was the only sound. With each word, her soul breathed. She wrote of injustice, of longing, of the suffocating silence imposed upon her. So engrossed was she in her thoughts that she did not hear the knock until the door creaked open. Alara, her younger sister Marianne, slipped inside, her golden hair falling loose over her shoulders. Only 16, Marianne's eyes held both admiration and fear when she looked at her elder sister. "You should not be awake," Marianne whispered. "If father knew." "He does not care if I sleep or wake," Alara said bitterly, covering the parchment with her hand. "So long as I obey." Marianne's voice trembled. "Do not speak so. He will hear you. I am tired of whispering, Marianne, tired of swallowing my words as if they were poison. Do you not feel it? The weight of silence pressing down on us? Her sister shook her head quickly, almost desperately. Better silence than punishment. Alara softened, reaching for her sister's hand. One day, Marianne, I pray you will know a world where your voice is not a sin. Marianne did not reply. She only squeezed her hand and left as quietly as she came. Alone again, Alara set down her quill. She lifted the candle, staring into the flickering flame. If only, she whispered to the empty chamber, there were someone who would listen. The next morning dawned pale and cold. Frost clung to the manor's windows, and mist hung heavy over the valley. Alara accompanied her mother to the village church, where nobles sat in gilded pews and peasants stood in silence behind. The priest spoke of obedience, of humility, of the order of men and women as ordained by heaven. His words fell heavy upon Alara's heart, each syllable another reminder of her cage. On the walk back to the manor, her mother noticed her silence. You frown too often, Alara, Lady Beatrice said softly but firmly. A husband does not want a sullen wife. You must learn to smile even when you disagree. Alara forced her lips into a faint curve. Like this, mother? Exactly. Inside, her voice screamed. That evening, when the family gathered once more at the dining table, Alara dared a small act of rebellion. Roland was boasting again, telling of how he had humiliated a farmer who dared dispute the tax. Laughter rippled from Gareth, indulgent smiles from their parents. Alara could bear it no longer. Perhaps, she said quietly, the farmer only wished for fairness. The table fell silent. Her father's fork clattered against the plate. What did you say? Her heart thundered. Her hands trembled under the table, but she lifted her eyes. Perhaps mercy would bring more loyalty than fear. The blow of her father's words was sharper than any hand. Silence, girl, he thundered. Do not lecture me on governance. You know nothing of duty, nothing of power. You will hold your tongue, or I will see it bound. Her brothers snickered. Her mother lowered her gaze, pretending not to hear. Shame burned hot in Alara's chest. She bowed her head, her cheeks flushed, her mouth sealed, but deep within, the fire only grew. That night, unable to sleep, Alara opened her window. The autumn wind rushed in, carrying the scent of damp leaves and pine. She looked out over the valley, at the distant lights of villages and the silver thread of the river winding through the land. Somewhere out there, she thought, people spoke freely. Somewhere out there, voices mattered. She drew her parchment again and wrote, her hand shaking with the force of her emotions. If only my words could fly beyond these walls. If only they could reach someone who would listen. She sealed the parchment, though she had no one to send it to. Still, she placed it in the satchel of a traveling scribe who came to deliver letters for her father the next morning. She told herself it was foolish, that no one would ever read it. Yet for the first time in her life, she felt a spark of defiance. Somewhere, somehow, her voice would be heard, and fate, though she did not yet know it, had already begun to carry her words farther than she could ever imagine. Chapter 2. A Kingdom in Need. The kingdom of Avaloria stretched wide across forests, rivers, and fertile plains, a jewel of stone and steel held together by a fragile crown. Its people spoke proudly of their heritage, but beneath the banners and songs, unrest stirred like a storm in the distance. In the heart of this realm stood the royal palace, white walls rising against the horizon, banners fluttering in the chill wind, and guards pacing its ramparts with solemn faces. Inside, however, the atmosphere was less noble and far more suffocating. The council chamber echoed with raised voices. "My king," declared Lord Roderick the Chancellor, his thin lips curling with disdain. "The treasury dwindles, the commoners complain, the merchants whisper of rebellion. We must act swiftly, raise taxes, seize grain, remind the people where their loyalty lies." At the head of the long table sat King Aldric, the golden circlet upon his brow catching the torchlight. His dark hair, a shade deeper than his storm-grey eyes, framed a face both youthful and marked by burdens beyond his years. Only 26, yet his gaze bore the weight of generations. He rested his hands calmly upon the table, his voice steady. "Raise taxes on a starving people, and you will not have loyalty. You will have revolt." Murmurs of disapproval rustled among the lords. Lord Harren, a portly man with rings glittering on his fingers, leaned forward. "Then perhaps war will serve us better. The southern provinces grow restless. A decisive strike would rally the people behind you, Majesty. Nothing unites a kingdom like victory." Aldric's jaw tightened. War for the sake of pride is blood wasted. A king's strength is not measured by how many coffins march home. Silence fell for a moment. The council exchanged glances, each lord calculating how best to press their will. It was Sir Rowan, the king's most trusted knight and childhood companion, who finally spoke. Standing at the edge of the chamber, his voice rang with quiet authority. "His Majesty seeks peace where others thirst for coin and glory. Perhaps you should consider his wisdom before demanding he mimic the sins of kings past." The lords scowled, muttering under their breath. King Aldric rose to his feet, his presence commanding though he did not raise his voice. "Gentlemen, the council is dismissed. I will consider your counsel, but the choice remains mine." One by one, the lords bowed stiffly and departed, their silks trailing behind them, their faces shadowed with discontent. When the doors closed, Aldric released a slow breath, his composure cracking just slightly. He ran a hand through his hair and turned to Rowan. "They speak as though I am a boy to be led by the hand," he muttered. "They whisper of war, of taxes, of alliances, but not once do they speak of the people they claim to serve." Rowan stepped forward, laying a hand upon his king's shoulder. "You are not your father, Aldric, and that unsettles them. They grew fat under a tyrant's rule, and now they must face a king who listens." "Listening is a dangerous habit, it seems," Aldric said with a weary smile. "They call me weak for it." "They fear you," Rowan corrected. "A man who listens cannot be easily deceived." That night, long after the council had gone to their feasts and chambers, Aldric wandered the palace gardens. The air was cool, the scent of roses and damp earth clinging to the night. Stars glittered above, silver against a sea of black. Here, away from the voices of lords and schemers, he allowed himself honesty. He knelt by the marble fountain, trailing his fingers through the water, as though it might wash away the crown's weight. "Is it so wrong," he murmured aloud, "to wish for truth? To hear a voice unshackled by ambition? Rowan, who had followed at a respectful distance, answered softly, "Truth rarely dwells in these halls, my king. If you seek it, you must look beyond them." Aldrich lifted his gaze to the stars, as if searching for an answer among them. His heart ached with a longing he could not quite name. And then a messenger arrived. Breathless, bowing low, he held out a parchment sealed with no crest. "Your Majesty, a letter slipped among the deliveries from the northern estates. It bore no name, but the words, they seemed worthy of your eyes." Aldrich raised a brow. "No name?" The messenger hesitated. "None, sire. Only ink, plain and unadorned." Curiosity piqued. Aldrich dismissed the man and broke the seal. By the moonlight, he read. The handwriting was delicate, the lines flowing like music, but it was the words that struck him to the core. How easily the voices of women are dismissed, locked away in silence while men boast of their power. How easily the cries of the poor are ignored, their hunger unseen while feasts weigh the tables of lords. Yet a kingdom is not sustained by gold or conquest, but by the hearts of its people. If only there were ears willing to listen. Aldrich read it once, twice, a third time. His chest tightened, not with anger but with wonder. Here were words untainted by greed, sharper than any polished speech he had ever endured. "Rowan," he whispered, "do you hear this?" Rowan glanced over his shoulder, scanning the parchment. His brows rose. "These are no common scribbles. Whoever wrote this sees what others dare not." Aldrich's fingers lingered on the page, "and speaks with courage I have not found in my counsel." "You do not even know who she is," Rowan cautioned. "No," Aldrich admitted, though his heart already insisted the voice belonged to a woman. There was strength in the words, but also the delicate sorrow of one long silenced. "But I will find her." For the next several nights, Aldrich returned to the letter, tracing its words as though they were a map. His counsel's demands began to grate upon him more than ever, their shallow ambitions sounding hollow when compared to the wisdom of a hidden voice. And then, as though fate itself had heard his yearning, a second letter arrived. This one was unsigned as well, yet the hand unmistakably the same. "I write not in hope of reply, for I know my words are destined for the fire, yet I cannot still my hand. I watch as my sisters are married to men twice their age, their laughter stifled, their opinions smothered. I watch as fathers and brothers silence daughters, as if silence were a virtue. And I wonder, is there any place in this kingdom where a woman's voice may matter?" Aldrich's hand tightened on the parchment. He closed his eyes, hearing the plea, not as ink, but as the raw cry of a soul. "There is," he whispered into the night. "If I must build it myself, there is." Rowan watched him carefully. "You are smitten with words, Aldrich. Do you not fear they may mislead you?" The king's gaze turned fierce. "Words such as these do not mislead, they awaken." Rowan inclined his head. "Then you must find their author, but tread carefully. If the council discovers you chase an unseen voice, they will twist it into a weapon against you." Aldrich folded the letter, tucking it close to his chest. "Let them plot. I will not rest until I find the one who dares to speak when all others remain silent." Far from the palace, in the cold chamber of Marlow Manor, Elara sat again at her desk, quill trembling in her hand. She had written another letter, never dreaming that the king himself now read her words by candlelight. As she sealed the parchment and slipped it into the satchel of a traveling scribe, she whispered into the darkness, "Fly, little words, fly where I cannot. May someone, somewhere, listen." She did not know that someone already had, and that her voice, once silenced, had begun to change the fate of a kingdom. Chapter 3. The King's Curiosity. The palace, though vast and gilded, offered little peace to King Aldrich in the days that followed. He carried the letters with him always, folded, tucked close to his heart inside the lining of his doublet. At night he read them again by the glow of his chamber fire, the words echoing in his mind long after the flames had dimmed. A kingdom is not sustained by gold or conquest, but by the hearts of its people. I wonder, is there any place in this kingdom where a woman's voice may matter? The voice was faceless, nameless, yet it had become a constant companion, a stranger, yet more honest than any counselor. Sir Rowan found him staring at the letters again one evening, his jaw tense. "You read them as if they hold the secrets of the world," Rowan remarked, leaning against the carved doorframe. Aldrich did not look up. "Perhaps they do." Rowan crossed the room, his boots striking the marble floor. "And what if it is a trick, a scheme by a rival house to sway your heart or weaken your rule?" "If it is a scheme," Aldrich replied firmly, "then it is the cleverest I have ever seen. But no, Rowan, these words are not laced with ambition. They are too raw, too honest." He lifted the parchment. "A deceiver flatters, she challenges." Rowan raised a brow. "She, you speak as though you know." Aldrich's lips curved faintly. "I feel it. A woman wrote these. A woman with a mind as keen as steel, and a soul as restless as a caged bird. I cannot explain it, but I know." The knight studied him, then gave a resigned sigh. "Then what will you do, my king?" "I will find her." Aldrich's voice was quiet but unyielding. "And when I do, I will hear her voice, not on parchment, but with my own ears." Meanwhile, in the distant cold halls of Marlow Manor, Elara lived unaware of the king's vow. The letter she had sent weighed upon her still. Each time she wrote, a thrill of fear coursed through her veins. If her father discovered her secret, his fury would know no bounds. That morning, as she walked the manor gardens with Marianne, her younger sister's words pricked her like thorns. "Elara," Marianne whispered, glancing around to be sure no one overheard. "I heard father speaking with Lord Blackthorn's envoy. They speak of a marriage. Yours, soon." Elara's hand tightened on her cloak. "He would not." "He would," Marianne insisted, eyes wide with worry. "Blackthorn offers wealth, soldiers, influence. Father will not refuse him." Elara's chest constricted. Marriage to Lord Blackthorn would be worse than a prison. He was known for cruelty, a man whose last wife had withered into silence before dying young. Marianne caught her arm. "Promise me you will not fight him, Elara. If you defy father, then what?" Elara's voice broke with bitterness. "He will silence me as he always has. I am already voiceless in this house." Marianne looked stricken, and Elara softened, brushing her sister's cheek. "Forgive me, I do not mean to frighten you. You frighten me most when you are brave," Marianne whispered. Elara said nothing, but that night, when all the manor slept, She wrote again, her words sharper now, fueled by desperation. They speak of binding me to a man whose heart is stone, whose hands are cruel. I do not fear marriage, but I fear a life where my thoughts are smothered, where my voice is forever chained. Must a woman's fate always be silence? Must her worth be measured only in coin and obedience? If so, then let me remain unwed, though the world call me a disgrace. She sealed the letter and slipped it into the satchel of the departing scribe. She did not know that her words would not simply be read this time. They would ignite a king's resolve. At the palace, Aldrich received the letter in the hush of his private chambers. He broke the seal with unsteady hands, his eyes devouring each line. By the end, his blood burned with anger, not at her, but at the cruelty she endured. "She is in danger," he said aloud, his voice low, almost a growl. Rowan, present as always, frowned. "From whom?" Aldrich slammed the parchment down. "From her own family, it seems. From a father who would barter her to a man she despises, from a world that would silence her voice because she dares to have one." Rowan hesitated. "And you mean to intervene?" "Yes." Aldrich's eyes blazed with determination. "I swore when I took this crown that I would defend my people. Does that not include the silenced, the unseen? She writes with courage greater than half the lords in this court, yet her life is a prison, no more." Rowan placed a hand on the hilt of his sword. "Then tell me what you command." Aldrich strode to the window, staring out across the city, the lights of countless lives flickering below. "We trace the letters, quietly, discreetly. Not a whisper of this must reach the council. If they knew, they would twist it into scandal." Rowan finished grimly. "A king bewitched by an unknown woman. Let them whisper," Aldrich said coldly. "I will not rest until I know her name." It took weeks of subtle investigation. Messengers questioned and scribes traced, but Rowan at last returned with news. "The letters," he said, laying a folded map upon the table in Aldrich's chamber, "come from the north. The scribe who carried them serves the estate of Lord Cedric Marlowe." Aldrich's gaze hardened. "Marlowe, a man more wolf than lord. I've heard whispers of his cruelty." Rowan nodded. "The household is large, but one detail stands out. He has daughters. The eldest, Lady Alara, is said to be fair, though kept from court. Too outspoken, they say." Aldrich's heart quickened at the name. Alara. It felt right, as if he had already known it in his bones. "Ilara," he whispered, "the caged bird with the storm in her eyes." Rowan studied him warily. "And now that you know?" "Now," Aldrich said, straightening resolve carved into every line of his face, "I will hear her voice, not from ink, but from her lips." Back at Marlowe Manor, Alara sat in her chamber window, watching the horizon darken with storm clouds. She felt the world closing in, her father's plans tightening like chains. Yet far away, a king was already riding toward her, determined to change the course of her fate. Chapter 4. A Forbidden Meeting. The announcement came like a thunderclap within Marlowe Manor. Lord Cedric Marlowe nearly burst with pride, parading through the halls, barking orders to polish the silver, trim the gardens, and scrub the stone floors until they shone. Servants scrambled, candles were doubled in every sconce, and Lady Beatrice oversaw the kitchens as though the king's visit were the judgment of heaven itself. To Alara, The news filled her not with pride, but with dread. Why would the king come here, of all places? The Marlowes were no closer to the throne than any other house. Her father boasted, "It is because of my loyalty, of course. The king values strength, and no house is as steadfast as mine." Elara said nothing. She knew her father would spin any tale to make himself the hero of the moment. Yet in her heart, a strange unease stirred, an unease she did not dare name. The day of the visit dawned with a pale, silvery sky. Trumpets sounded as the royal entourage rode up the long hill toward the manor gates. Banners of deep crimson fluttered in the wind, the crowned lion of Avaloria gleaming against the grey. Elara stood with her family in the great hall, her gown of soft blue, chosen not by her, but by her mother, who insisted the king must see her eldest daughter well kept, if nothing else. When the heavy doors opened and King Aldric entered, the room seemed to hush. He wore no crown, only a simple circlet of gold, his dark hair falling loose to his shoulders. His grey eyes swept across the chamber, sharp and searching. Lord Cedric bent into a deep bow, his voice booming with false humility. "Your Majesty, what an honor to receive you in our humble hall." Aldric's lips curved faintly, though not in warmth. "Lord Cedric, I thank you for your welcome." As the king exchanged formalities with her father, Elara stood silently, her gaze lowered. She dared not meet his eyes, yet something compelled her, like a tide she could not resist. Slowly she lifted her head, and in that moment his eyes found hers. For an instant the world stilled. Elara's breath caught, her heart stumbling in her chest. Those storm-grey eyes did not pass over her as others did. They lingered, sharp as if they could pierce her very soul. She looked away quickly, cheeks burning. Surely he could not know. Could he? The evening passed in a blur of feasting and flattery. Her father boasted of his lands. Her brothers laughed too loudly at the king's measured words, and her mother hovered with a watchful eye. Elara kept to her place, speaking only when directly addressed, her voice soft and restrained. Yet each time she glanced up, she found the king's gaze upon her, calm, unreadable, but intent. By the time the candles burned low, and the household retired, Elara's heart was a storm. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling beams, restless with thoughts she could not silence. At last, unable to endure, she rose and slipped into her cloak. The manor gardens, bathed in moonlight, called to her like a sanctuary. She walked among the roses, their petals silvered by dew, the night air cool upon her face. She thought herself alone, until a voice broke the silence. "You write beautifully, my lady." Elara froze, the words striking her like an arrow. She spun, her cloak swirling, and there he was, King Aldric, standing in the shadows of the garden, his cloak dark against the pale stone, his eyes alight with quiet fire. Her breath faltered. "Your Majesty, you need not deny it," he said gently, stepping closer. "Your words found me, Elara." Her heart thudded painfully. You read them?" "I have read them 100 times," Aldric admitted, his voice low. "Each letter more precious than any counsel I have ever been given." Tears stung her eyes, born of fear as much as wonder. If my father knew I had written such things, he would silence you, Aldric finished, his tone dark. "Yes, I see it in this house already, but you need not fear him tonight, not here." Elara's lips trembled. "You cannot understand. All my life I have been told my voice is dangerous, that my thoughts are shameful. Aldrich closed the space between them, his gaze steady. And yet those very thoughts may save a kingdom. Do you not see, Alara? The truth you write is the truth I seek. You speak where others dare not. Her eyes filled. But I am only one woman, powerless. Powerless? Aldrich shook his head. No, Alara, you have power enough to move a king. The words hung in the night like a vow. Alara's chest rose and fell, her pulse wild. I do not know why you would listen, she whispered. Because your voice matters, Aldrich said simply. It matters to me. For the first time in her life, she was not silenced. She spoke, hesitant at first, then freer, her words tumbling out, her dreams of justice, her despair at the cages of women, her longing to be seen not as a vessel of duty but as a soul. And he listened, truly listened, as no one ever had. When at last the hour grew late and they parted, Alara returned to her chamber trembling, her heart alight with something dangerous and beautiful. For in the shadows of the garden, under the silent witness of the moon, she had found not only a listener, but a king who had vowed never to silence her again. Chapter 5. The Weight of Secrets. The days after the king's visit unfolded like a dream. Alara scarcely dared believe was real. She had spoken with him, truly spoken, and instead of scorn or censure, he had listened as though her words were treasures. Yet in the cold light of morning, the memory seemed impossible. Kings did not walk among gardens at midnight. Kings did not linger to hear the voice of women hidden from court. And yet each evening since, she felt his presence. When the household slept, Aldrich found his way to the gardens once more, cloaked in silence, carrying no retinue, no crown, only himself. Their conversations grew longer, richer, as though they had known one another for years instead of days. One night, as they stood beneath the boughs of a great oak, Aldrich asked, "Tell me, Alara, if you could change one thing in this kingdom, what would it be?" She hesitated, her breath clouding in the chill air. "Only one thing?" He smiled faintly. "For now." Her eyes darkened. "I would change the way daughters are silenced. We are raised to obey, to adorn, to marry, but never to think, never to lead. And yet, are we not born with the same fire as sons?" Aldrich's gaze lingered on her, fierce with admiration. "You speak as though you were born to reign." She shook her head quickly. "No, not to reign, only to be heard." "Then you ask for less than you deserve," he said firmly. Her breath caught, startled by the intensity in his tone. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the rustle of leaves and the faint song of night-birds. It was Aldrich who broke it, his voice softer now. "Your father would never allow such thoughts to leave your lips?" "No," Alara admitted, bitterness lacing her words. "To him, I am currency, to be traded when it serves his ambition. Already he speaks of Lord Blackthorn." Aldrich's jaw tightened. "I know of him, a man who breaks what he claims to own." Her voice trembled. "If father forces me into his hands, I fear I will not survive it." Without thought, Aldrich stepped closer, taking her hand. The gesture was bold, reckless, but he could not stop himself. "Then I will not allow it," he vowed, his voice low but unshakable. "You will not be silenced, Alara, not while I draw breath." Her lips parted, her heart a wild, unsteady storm. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe in a world where her fate was not sealed by others, but as the sound of footsteps echoed faintly from the manor, they broke apart, their hands falling guiltily to their sides. Elara's pulse raced. "If they find us, they will not," Aldrich promised, though the shadow in his eyes betrayed his own fear. But the weight of secrecy pressed heavier with each passing day. Within the manor, Lady Beatrice had begun to watch her eldest daughter with sharper eyes. "You are restless, Elara," she remarked one morning, her tone deceptively casual. "Why do you wander the gardens so often of late?" Elara forced a smile. "The air soothes me, that is all." Her mother studied her in silence, as though she could peel back the layers of her daughter's heart. Worse still was her father. Lord Cedric's plans with Lord Blackthorn grew bolder. The negotiations whispered late into the night. "The king may visit my hall," he boasted to his sons, "but Blackthorn will be my true ally, and through this marriage my power will be unshakable." Elara overheard, her stomach twisting. Far away, in the marble halls of the palace, Aldrich too bore the strain of secrecy. He returned from Marlow Manor with the taste of Elara's words lingering in his heart. Yet before his council he was the same measured sovereign. The lords debated taxes and borders, oblivious to the fire consuming their king. Only Sir Rowan noticed. "You vanish at night," Rowan said one evening when they walked the battlements together. "Your eyes are elsewhere by day. Tell me, Aldrich, how far are you willing to go for this woman?" Aldrich's grip tightened on the stone wall. "As far as I must." Rowan exhaled slowly. "Then you must prepare for war, not with armies, but with whispers. If the council learns you meet her in secret, they will paint her as a temptress, a schemer, and you, a fool." Aldrich's gaze turned hard as steel. "Let them. I would rather be a fool who listens to truth than a king who rules in silence." Back at Marlow Manor, Elara's nights with Aldrich became her only freedom, her only breath of life in a house that sought to suffocate her. But freedom born in shadows cannot last forever. One evening, as she slipped through the corridor toward the garden, a voice cut through the darkness. "Where do you go, sister?" Elara froze. It was her younger brother Damien, sharp-eyed, ambitious, always eager to please their father. She forced calm into her voice. "Only for air." Damien's gaze narrowed. "At midnight? Dressed so carefully?" Her heart pounded, but she lifted her chin. "Does the hour matter if I seek peace?" He studied her for a long, suspicious moment, then stepped aside. "Be careful, Elara. Father does not tolerate secrets." As she passed, her hands shook beneath her cloak. That night, when Aldrich met her beneath the roses, she clung to his hand as though the world itself conspired to tear them apart. "They will find out," she whispered. "I can feel it." Aldrich drew her close, his breath warm against her hair. "Then let them. No power in this realm will take your voice from me." Yet even as he held her, a shadow lingered in Elara's heart, for secrets, once discovered, could destroy them both. Chapter 6. The Betrayal. It was not her father, nor her brothers, who unraveled Elara's secret. It was Marianne, sweet, gentle Marianne, whose timid nature had always clung to shadows, carried within her a heart heavy with envy she herself barely understood. For years she had watched Elara speak boldly where she dared not, watched her sister's fire ignite even in chains, while she, the younger, had been content to obey. But envy is a quiet thing whispering in corners. It was one late evening when Elara knelt in prayer by her bedside, whispering Aldrich's name into the silence, that Marianne's world shifted. Her sister's lips moved with devotion, not to God, but to the king. And Marianne, frozen in the doorway, understood all the strange restlessness, the late-night wanderings, the light in Elara's eyes these past weeks. It was all because of him. Fear seized her heart. Their father's wrath was legendary. If he discovered Elara's disobedience, would he cast his fury upon the whole household? Would she, Marianne, be punished as well for keeping silent? So she did what fear demanded. She confessed. Lord Cedric Marlowe's rage erupted like a storm. "You dare defy me?" His voice shook the very rafters of the great hall. "You bring shame upon this house with your wantonness, consorting with a king as if you were some common harlot." Elara stood trembling but unyielding, her eyes burning even as tears welled. "I have done nothing shameful. I only spoke words you forbade me since childhood." And he listened. Cedric spat. "A king humors you for a night, and you call it honor? Foolish girl, you think yourself special when you are nothing but a pawn in this world." He turned, his face flushed scarlet with fury. "You will marry Lord Blackthorn within the month. Your rebellion ends here. Your voice ends here." Elara dropped to her knees, clasping her hands before him. "Father, please, I beg you. Blackthorn is cruel. He will destroy me. Better destroyed in obedience than alive in disgrace," Cedric roared. Her pleas struck stone. The walls swallowed her voice, as they always had. She was dragged back to her chamber, her belongings stripped away, the door barred with iron. For days she sat in that prison of silence, her spirit trembling on the edge of despair. And Marianne, tormented by guilt, yet too frightened to speak, wept alone in her room, unable to undo what had been done. Word of Elara's punishment traveled swiftly, carried by whispers through the halls of scribes until it reached the palace. When Aldrich learned the truth, his fury was unlike any the court had ever seen. "Locked away? Bartered like coin?" His voice thundered in the council chamber, echoing against the marble walls. "While you sit here debating taxes, a woman of this realm is caged for daring to speak her mind, for daring to breathe." The councillors exchanged uneasy glances. Lord Thero, eldest among them, raised a placating hand. "Majesty, this is a matter of a household's discipline, not the crown's concern. To involve yourself is to overstep." "Overstep?" Aldrich cut him off, his grey eyes blazing. "I am king of Avaloria. Every voice in this land is my concern, and hers most of all." "Majesty," another lord interjected, "your passion blinds you. If you ride against Lord Marlowe now, the nobles will see it as recklessness, an indulgence of affection rather than duty." But Aldrich was already striding toward the doors, his cloak swirling behind him like a storm cloud. "Then let them see what they will. I will not leave her in chains." That night he rode like a man possessed, through rain and darkness, with only Rowan and a handful of loyal guards. He thundered across the hills toward Marlowe Manor. His heart pounded with each stride of his horse. He saw Elara's face in every flash of lightning, pale and desperate behind her barred window. By dawn, the gates of Marlowe Manor groaned open to admit the fury of a king. Elara's father stood in the courtyard, his sons flanking him, arrogance writ upon his face. But that arrogance faltered when he saw Aldrich dismount, his sword at his hip, his eyes cold as steel. "Your Majesty," Cedric stammered, forcing a bow. "You honor my house? Enough." Aldrich's voice cracked like thunder. "You would silence your own daughter for ambition, lock her away, sell her to a butcher like Blackthorn, and call it honor?" Cedric bristled, pride warring with fear. "She is mine to command. She is my blood. Her duty is to this house." "No." Aldrich stepped forward, every word a blade. "Her voice is hers, and from this day forth, it is under my crown's protection." The air thickened with silence. The Marlowe sons shifted uneasily. Even Cedric, towering in his wrath, paled beneath the weight of the king's fury. At last, with no choice but submission, he bowed his head. "As you command, your Majesty." Moments later, the locks on Alara's door were broken, and Aldrich himself entered her chamber. She rose from the edge of her narrow bed, disbelief flooding her features as she saw him. "Aldrich." Her voice was a whisper. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands, his eyes fierce yet tender. "Alara, you are free. You are mine to protect now." Her tears spilled over, a mingling of relief and fear. But at what cost? The cost came swiftly. By the time they returned to the palace, the council was in uproar. Word spread like wildfire. The king had defied noble law for the sake of a woman. "He has risked the stability of the throne for her," Lord Thero declared. "Is this not recklessness? Is this not the weakness of a man undone by dangerous affection?" Whispers became rumors. Rumors became flames. Rebellion stirred among lords who saw the king's act as an affront to their power, and Alara, though no longer a prisoner of her father, found herself a prisoner of guilt. She sat alone in her chamber one night, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman who gazed back seemed both stronger and more fragile than before. Her voice was free, but at what price? She whispered into the silence, "I have brought him peril." And though her heart longed for Aldrich, though every word he had spoken to her rang with truth, the weight of her guilt pressed heavy, for love had freed her, but it had placed a kingdom in chains. Chapter 7. The Voice That Changed a Kingdom. The palace had never felt so divided. Whispers slithered through its corridors like smoke. "The king is bewitched. The king has betrayed his council. The king endangers the throne for a woman." The council chamber grew more venomous with each passing day. Lords gathered in corners, conspiring in low voices, while letters flew like daggers across the kingdom, stirring discontent. Some whispered rebellion, others deposition, and at the center of it all stood King Aldrich, unyielding, defiant, yet weighed by the peril pressing on his crown. "You must cast her aside," Lord Thero declared in council, his voice sharp as steel. "The people will not forgive such indulgence. Keep her hidden if you must, but not as queen." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly, but Aldrich rose from his throne, his eyes blazing. "You speak of stability while you trample justice. You would have me silence the only voice in this realm that dares speak truth. I will not." The chamber fell into uneasy silence. That night, in the quiet of her chamber, Alara sat by the fire, her heart heavy. Aldrich entered, his face shadowed with fatigue, but still alight with the fierce determination she had come to know. "They want me to cast you aside," he said plainly, no courtly dressing to soften the truth. She lowered her eyes, "And perhaps they are right. My presence brings you nothing but peril." Aldrich crossed the room, kneeling before her, his hands enfolding hers. "No, you bring me truth. You bring me clarity, when all others bring me flattery and lies. Without your voice, I would rule blind." Her eyes shimmered. "But if keeping me costs you the throne, then let it cost me," he interrupted, his voice fierce. "I would sooner lose my crown than lose the one soul who speaks to me as a man, not as a king." Tears blurred her vision. She wanted to protest, to beg him not to sacrifice so much for her. But the conviction in his voice silenced her. For the first time in her life, silence did not feel like defeat. The day of reckoning arrived beneath stormy skies. The great hall was crowded with nobles, counselors, and soldiers. Whispers rippled through the assembly like the rustling of dry leaves, brittle and sharp with tension. At the dais, Aldrich stood tall, his presence commanding, though the weight of rebellion loomed like thunder. When silence fell, he spoke. "You call me reckless, you call me blind. You say I have endangered the crown with affection." His voice rang across the chamber. "Perhaps I am reckless, reckless enough to believe a kingdom should be built on more than greed and ambition, reckless enough to believe that one silenced voice may yet save us all." Gasps echoed as he turned toward the doors. "Bring her." Elara was led forward by Sir Rowan, her steps slow, her hands trembling against the fabric of her gown. The weight of every gaze pressed upon her, suffocating in its intensity. She reached the dais, her knees threatening to give way, but Aldrich's hand was there, steady and warm. "Speak," he whispered. His eyes held hers, unwavering. "As you have spoken to me." The hall seemed to tilt around her as Elara drew in a trembling breath. Every fear, every memory of being silenced by her father, her mother, her brothers, threatened to choke her voice. But then she remembered the garden, the moonlight, the king who had listened, the promise in his eyes. She lifted her chin. "My lords," she began, her voice soft yet clear, "I am no queen, no counselor. I am but a woman who has lived my life unheard. My father silenced me, my family scorned me, and yet the king listened." A stir ran through the assembly, but Elara pressed on, her words gathering strength. "You sit in these halls, speaking of power and gold, while outside these walls peasants labor until their backs break. Soldiers bleed on battlefields and return to find their families starving. Daughters are bartered like coin, their voices caged. And you call this stability, you call this justice?" Her voice rose, fierce and unflinching now. "A kingdom is not built on silenced voices. It is built on compassion, on justice, on listening to those you deem too small to matter. If you silence me, then silence every woman, every peasant, every soldier whose cry you do not hear. But know this, if you do, your kingdom will crumble, for no crown can stand forever upon the bones of the voiceless." The words rang through the hall like the toll of a great bell. Silence followed. For a long, trembling moment, no one dared breathe. Then the murmurs began, first low, uncertain, then rising like a wave. Not scorn, but wonder. Not condemnation, but awakening. "She speaks truth. We have been blind, a voice for the people." The tide turned before their very eyes. Even those who had schemed against Aldrich found themselves bowing, grudging but subdued before the force of Elara's words, and the people who heard of it beyond the palace walls cried out in support, their voices echoing hers until the city itself seemed to roar. Aldrich stepped forward, his chest rising with triumph and pride. He took Elara's hand hand and raised it high before all. She was silenced by her family, he declared, his voice strong enough to shake the rafters. But I listened, and I will never allow her to be silenced again. From this day forth, let her voice be the voice of Avaloria's queen. The hall erupted in thunderous cheers. Elara stood frozen, her heart soaring, tears spilling down her cheeks. No longer the caged daughter, no longer the whispered disgrace. She was free, she was heard, she was queen, and in Aldrich's unwavering gaze she saw not only love, but a kingdom that, at last, would listen. Chapter 8. The Queen's Promise. The echoes of that day lingered long after the cheers had faded. Elara's words had spread like fire through the kingdom. From the marble courts of nobles to the muddy streets of villages, whispers of the woman who dared to speak rippled across Avaloria. Some lords muttered still, clinging to their wounded pride, but their voices faltered before the rising tide of the people. For once, the council bowed not to tradition but to truth, and Elara, the silenced daughter, awoke each day in chambers of light, no longer a prisoner, but a queen. On the morning of her coronation, she stood before the mirror as the attendants wove her hair with threads of gold and placed upon her shoulders the mantle of deep crimson velvet. Yet when the chamber emptied, Aldrich entered quietly. He came not as a king, but as the man who had walked with her beneath the moon, who had listened to her when no one else would. "You look every inch the queen," he said, his eyes soft with pride. Elara turned to him, her lips curving in a trembling smile. "I never wished to be queen, Aldrich, only to be heard. And now," he murmured, taking her hands, "you shall be both." The coronation unfolded in the great cathedral, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows in rivers of color. The people filled the square outside, their voices rising in chants that shook the very stones. When the crown was placed upon Elara's brow, she felt its weight, not of gold, but of the countless lives her voice would now touch. She looked out across the sea of faces and spoke, her voice steady. "I was once a daughter silenced by fear. I was once a woman locked away for daring to speak. But today I stand not for myself alone. I stand for every soul who has ever been told their voice does not matter. From this day forward, let this kingdom be built not on silence, but on the strength of every voice that dares to rise." The cathedral thundered with applause, the bells pealing as if heaven itself rejoiced. That night, when the feasting had ended and the music faded, Aldrich and Elara walked together through the quiet palace gardens. The moon shone as it had on the night of their first meeting, silvering the roses with dew. Elara paused, her fingers brushing the petals. "Do you remember, Aldrich, the first time you found me here, and I thought I would be silenced forever?" He smiled faintly, drawing her into his arms. "And do you remember what I said? That your voice mattered to me. It always will." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Then let me promise this. As queen, I will never forget the voices beyond these walls, the farmers, the soldiers, the women who still live in silence. I will be their echo until they are heard." He kissed her hair, his voice a vow. "And I will stand beside you, for a king who does not listen is no king at all." The years ahead would not be without struggle. The lords would resist, the council would test them, and shadows of envy would always stir in quiet places. But together, Aldrich and Alara would endure. She was no longer the daughter silenced by her family. She was the queen whose voice changed a kingdom. And when the chronicles of Avaloria were written, they did not speak only of Aldrich the Just, but of Alara the Brave,